collaborative effort between Evergreen Charter School and Circulo de la Hispanidad. We are grateful to all our volunteers that have made this possible tonight.
My name is Bernardino. I am the founder and executive director of Circulo de la Hispanidad, a community-based organization established over 40 years ago. I am also the founder of Evergreen Charter School, together with Dr. Sarah Brewster. I currently serve as president of the Board of Trustees. Dr. Brewster serves as the Chief Director of Services and Operations at Circulo de la Hispanidad. She's also the Vice President of the Board of Trustees. We serve as your moderators tonight. Welcome, everybody. Bienvenidos todos.
We want to thank our distinguished panelists for their participation. We have Senator Kevin Thomas, Assemblywoman Taylor Darling, Scottie Coads, the New York State Civic Engagement Chair of the NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, and she is going to be joining us on video shortly. She's here on audio currently. We also have Osman Canales. He's the founder of the Long Island Immigrant Student Advocates, and we have Kevin McKenna, the reporter from the town of Oyster Bay News. We're excited to be able to offer this forum for our community and especially to the students of Evergreen Charter School. We want to say a special thank you to Mr. Sean Scottie for his effort to coordinate this event. He was assisted with help from committee members Joan Soares, Lee Marie Tatnall, Maria Perez, Ariane Brutus, and Carla King. Thank you to all. In addition to the webinar in English, we're holding a live translation via Zoom, thanks to our Spanish translators. Our translators are Gracia Guzman, Lee Marie Tatnall, and Liz Marie Martinez. I'd like to give special thanks to our technology coordinators, Mr. Jason Black, for overseeing the webinar this evening, and Dr. Elena Letescu, who's overseeing and coordinating the Spanish translation tonight for us on Zoom. We're grateful to all our administrators, students, families, teachers, staff, and everyone who helped to get the word out and work with students around this initiative.
The questions for tonight's forum were developed from Evergreen Charter School students, families, teachers, administrators, board members, and from Circulo de la Hispanidad staff and community members. We will begin with a short introduction of our panelists.
We have Senator Kevin Thomas, New York State Senator. Senator Thomas proudly represents the 6th Senate District in Nassau County, New York, where he lives in Levittown with his wife, Rincy, a pharmacist, and their baby girl, Layla, and dog, Cyrus. He was elected in 2018, becoming the first Indian American to serve in the Empire State Senate. Senator Thomas serves as chairman of the Consumer Protection Committee and sits on the Judiciary, Finance, Banking, Aging, Veterans, Homeland Security, and Military Affairs Committees. Prior to his election, he was a civil rights attorney with the New York Legal Aid Group and was an appointee to the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights to the New York State Advisory Committee. We also have joining us tonight, New York State Assemblywoman Taylor Darling. It is Assemblywoman Darling's greatest honor and privilege to represent the beautiful 18th Assembly District of New York. Assemblywoman Darling is an American and British citizen who was born in Brooklyn, New York, to Ralston and Tawana Bertley. She is a crusader for inclusion, equity, economic, and social justice. We also have joining us on phone and shortly video, Ms. Scottie Coads, the New York State Civic Engagement Chair of the NAACP. Hazel Scottie Gordine Coads, or Scottie, as she is known to friends and family since she was 2 years old, has been a resident of Lakeview, West Hempstead since 1977. Presently, Scottie serves proudly as chair of the civic engagement of the NAACP and as coordinator of the NAACP New York State U.S. Census for 2020. Scottie's civic engagement responsibilities require extensive and continuous training in communities on voter education, voter empowerment, voter suppression, and research on redistricting and its impact on minorities in the state of New York, as well as our country. We also have joining us tonight, Osman Canales. He's an activist, an advocate, and the founder of the Long Island Immigrant Student Advocates. Osman Canales is an immigrant rights, education, and social justice Latino advocate. In 2010, he founded the Long Island Immigrant Student Advocates organization, dedicated to empowering immigrant youth on Long Island. The organization's focus is to access equity education, empowerment, and youth leadership development and advocacy. Osman is originally from El Salvador and came to the U.S. at a young age. He has received many recognitions for his leadership, and he currently serves on the board of Circulo de la Hispanidad. Mr. Kevin McKenna is our final panelist this evening. He's from the town of Oyster Bay News. Mr. McKenna is a dad and a grandfather of 2 from Syosset. He spent 20 successful years in sales management working for the global company Siemens. Now semi-retired, he drives and ride sharing and manages the town of Oyster Bay News. When his video, he founded 4 years ago, excuse me. He managed the town of Oyster Bay News, which he founded 4 years ago. Most recently, his reporting was in the news when his video documenting the peaceful Merrick protest went viral. Over 500,000 viewers watched as residents and counter-protesters attempted to block the peaceful protests that drew residents from Merrick and many other communities to march in solidarity. Again, thank you to all our panelists. We have until 8:30 tonight for our panel discussion. We know that does not leave a lot of time for questions, but we will try to get through as many as we can. We will begin with a short introduction from our Senator and Assemblywoman on current legislation happening at the state level. This will be brief, so we have time to get to additional questions, and panelists have been asked to keep their answers to approximately 2 minutes.
Senator Kevin Thomas and Assemblywoman Darling, please provide us with a brief update about reform legislation in the Senate and in the Assembly.
So I'll quickly go over about half of it because there are a whole slew of bills and I don't want to go through all of them. So Taylor and I will team up. All right. So let me talk about, Section 58 of the Civil Rights Law that provides additional protections to the personnel records of police officers, firefighters, and correction officers. This is a full repeal. And this protection has been interpreted to include disciplinary records of law enforcement officers. So this now is open to the public. They'll have to do a FOIL request. Another bill that we push forward in the legislature will create the Office of Special Investigation within the Department of Law, where the Attorney General's office, which will investigate and, if warranted, prosecute any incident of a person whose death was caused by a police officer or a peace officer. Another bill that we passed by Senator Kevin Parker clarifies that a person who is not under arrest or in custody has the right to record police activity. We also passed a law called the Eric Garner Anti-Chokehold Act, which will now prohibit the use of chokeholds by law enforcement and establish the crime of aggravated strangulation as a Class C felony. I'll let Assemblywoman Darling do the rest.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me today on the panel. So some laws that were recently introduced to address issues in police reform here in New York State was we have one law that has like the officer's duty to report officers, which is really important because when officers are not adhering to the conduct based on regulations from the state and based on regulations from their particular police departments, then we depend on other officers to hold them accountable. And right now there seems to be a climate where that doesn't always happen. So now we've decided to introduce legislation to ensure that that happens and that those officers are protected because they're mandated to report any misconduct. Another really important law that was introduced by my colleague, Assemblywoman Fernandez, was the criminal liability for failure to obtain medical care. So during a lot of these instances, we will hear people say that they need help or they're asking for medical attention because they can't breathe or because something else is going on. And from a lot of the videos that we have witnessed, there doesn't seem to be any sense of urgency or any need to do that. So there are people who are taken into custody who need medical care and they're not always provided with that. So now we have legislation introduced to ensure that they understand that this is part of their responsibility of protecting and serving, ensuring that even people taken into custody do have access to care when they need it. And I'll give you guys one more. We have the body cameras for New York State Police. So I'm really excited about body cameras. Freeport Village, our neighboring village, was one of the first villages in the state of New York, I believe, to mandate that police officers have to wear body cameras. And they did that to make sure that they were accountable to their public in all interactions between law enforcement and the public. So now we do have a law. We introduced a law to make sure that New York State Police also has body cameras. And those are the people that usually pull you over for traffic or violations on highways and state roads. So it's important. All these interactions can be documented so that we, again, can hold everyone accountable, from the people who are pulled over to, again, our law enforcement professionals. So those are three ways that we are combating police reform through legislation. So.
Thank you. Do you think that's enough? And where do we go from here?
This is just the start. The stars had aligned for us in this moment in time, and we are starting to look at everything possible at this point, and we've been moving forward with more bills in the near future to basically make it even better for our communities. But the bills that both the Assemblywoman and I voted on last 2 weeks is just the framework for what is to come in the future.
I'm just going to take a pause because we have our three ladies that are translating this, so we're going to go slow so they can catch up for a moment. Thank you for responding to that. What about efforts on the federal level?
So I'll say on the federal level, some efforts, because of everything that's happened in the civil rights movement that we're now a part of, after the impromptu pandemic, we're in an impromptu civil rights movement. We've been really partnering with various levels of government. So I was speaking to Congresswoman Rice. We had a major discussion about particularly this exact topic. And one thing that she's working on is really making sure that she's hearing what the constituents need on a local level. So she recently said she's going to form sort of like a workshop or a working group so that we can start determining what policy needs to be passed at the local level to address these concerns our constituents have regarding our interactions with law enforcement. So that's one thing that I'm really excited about. We've probably spoken 3 or 4 times in the past 2 weeks, which is a lot more than we've really spoken since I came into office, because the need is there. We need all levels of government, all hands on deck right now to make sure that our constituents are heard and their concerns are addressed.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So now these questions for all the panelists. So please any of you can answer. How do I explain to my children what is happening in our country now?
Okay, I'll take that one. So the way that I'm explaining it to children is first to ask them what they understand about it. Because what we have to understand, especially with distance learning, our children are spending a lot more time on the internet, on their phones, on their tablets. So they're seeing the videos, they're hearing us discuss things. So I like to first understand what their take is on everything happening. And then from there, I gently autocorrect and guide. So if they say, hey, you know, I've heard some kids say, it's really bad to be Black here in America because the police are going to arrest you and kill you. That is not accurate. So we start from there. We start dissecting that. And I'll explain there have been a lot of instances where people of color have been targeted and have been hurt and not treated well by certain law enforcement professionals. But we are working on ways to address that. And then I ask them, what are some ideas? How do you think that we can address this issue? And just pretty much piece by piece dissecting what they understand at an age appropriate level and being available for any questions that might come, because we know children always have 10 follow-up questions. So that's how I would explain things to children, because they understand what's going on. They do. They have at least a very small understanding. They're hearing things. They're here.
Any of the panelists wants to just supplement what
I have a 19-month-old at home. I mean, you probably just saw her walk into this event and out. You know, she won't understand even if I do explain it to her. But when she does grow up, I want her to know that she grew up in the second civil rights movement, and that's what we're going through right now. We have never seen this type of solidarity and unity among everyone nationwide for police accountability and reform. Never. You know, we've seen the civil rights movement decades ago push forward and you know, bring about lots of change, and this is going to do the same. That's what I'm going to be explaining to her.
Hi, Kevin here. I happen to have two grown children that are in their 30s, and I also happen to be a grandfather to a 7-year-old Black grandson. And my daughter, who's white, who has been talking to me about her concerns, you know, for a while now, and now I'm starting to understand her concerns. You know, I'm learning. But, you know, she's struggling right now. He's 7 years old. And, you know, she's struggling, you know, when is the right time for her to talk to him about this? You know, he's a very intelligent young man, and she's watching right now. And I'm sure there's a lot of people that, you know, need to learn about how to handle this with someone young and at what age.
Okay. So, Sarah?
This is important as we be able to open up lines of communication with our youth. It's really essential to talk about, and I like all of your responses because it helps create dialogue. And I think what Assemblywoman Darling mentioned about asking what children understand is important. Another question that we had from some of our participants was, why are millions of people mobilizing around the United States and in countries now when there have been other police abuses against Blacks in the recent past without the same level of demonstration?
Does someone else want to take it? I'll start. I'll be brief. I would say that Senator Thomas said it best. The stars really aligned. So we had the impromptu pandemic, which means a lot of us have been in our homes for 3 months, right? And we've missed social interaction, some of us. So if you Compound that by the fact that everyone's paying attention to things happening as a result of the pandemic, as a result of being home. You know, the news and social media are really some people's only window to the outside world. So now we do have the right to protest. Everyone's paying attention. A lot of people still have not returned to work. So the protests are really an opportunity for people to share how they feel about where the country's going, how they feel about authority in government, you know, because authority in government have been the people who have been controlling the movements of the pandemic. So now we're able to come together in solidarity for a cause. And also, the video was heinous. There was really the George Floyd murder was just heinous. Like, there really was no gray area in that situation. There were so many things wrong that anyone who, whether they're involved in law enforcement or not, could definitely see that things went wrong with that situation. So I think that this was just like the perfect storm to create what is definitely overdue, which is the second civil rights movement.
I just wanted to add to that this didn't start it right at the death or murder of George Floyd. People for many years had been advocating for equal treatment, had been advocating against police brutality for many, many years already. There have been many other incidents that the media has reported on and people didn't find out about it, but there are other incidents that no one reported about it, but there was but it did happen, right? So for many years, people have been advocating for change, have been advocating for police accountability, right? Trevor Martin, for example, right? That was one case that took national media attention as well. Eric Garner, right, in New York City, Staten Island. But there are many other cases. I've been to Black Lives Matter protests, for many years ago, right? So we've been advocating for this for many years, and that's what I'm trying to get. And this is just the case, I guess, that really, took everyone's attention in a way. There's always one case that it will take, most people's attention, and this is one of the cases. But my point is that we're tired. We're tired of marching. We're tired of asking for equal treatment. We're tired of asking for police accountability. And this is the case that, what we're seeing now is a result of that. It's a result of the fear, but also the frustration of many community of color across the country that have been advocating for change for a long time already.
If I can add, I want to agree with both panelists here. In addition, what we're seeing also is a repudiation of the federal government and the federal administration, because you see Trump coming out there and saying things on Long Island, like, if you're arresting someone, don't take it easy on them. He was basically setting things on fire, and the country rose up. That was a repudiation against him and his administration and his tactics in what he's doing to divide the country here.
I would just like to
go ahead. I'm just going to remind all panelists to speak slowly for our translators. We just had a little request, so thank you. Go ahead, Mr. McKenna.
Okay.
Yeah, I just want to say that, the three prior speakers hit. I agree with all of you. I think that because of the political climate, I think that more people are paying attention. I think that the millennials are more outspoken than young people were in the past when I was young. I think that the internet allows young people to watch what's going on, because when I was young, I didn't even read the newspaper, so now they have the internet. And I think that social media has enabled people to organize, unlike any way in the past, to be able to organize and speak out.
Okay, so now we go to the next question. What does Black Lives Matter mean? Don't all lives matter? How should one respond?
I'll start off with, you know, I've seen on social media people arguing about, you know, Black Lives Matter, all lives matter. Of course, all lives matter. Every human life matters. How could anybody dispute that? But until Black Lives Matter, all lives don't matter. So it's just a play on words.
Yes, I would say that Black Lives Matter speaks to exactly what Kevin just mentioned. Speaks to the fact that, you know, often people of African descent who were, you know, kidnapped and brought to this country have almost always been disregarded, you know, and now that we do have you know, a great influx of people from other areas who have migrated here to America, it really shines a light on the treatment that, you know, unfortunately America almost has gotten comfortable giving to people of African descent. So it really shines that light as we look at immigration reform, as we look at, you know, just how we're treating people who are different from us. That Black Lives Matter piece always comes up because we haven't resolved it. We haven't found a way to address the atrocities that brought us here, the atrocities that have happened to us and continue to happen to us. And until that happens, that Black Lives Matter piece has to sit on its own laurels because it has not been addressed. And that's what that means to me.
Black Lives Matter because they've been systematically been discriminated against. Their lives have been lost. They weren't allowed to basically save up money and go up into the middle class as many other races were. That's why Black lives matter. And all lives matter, but Black lives at this point have a spotlight because of the atrocities and how they've been systematically been discriminated.
This is Scottie Coads. Can everybody hear me?
Ms.
Yep.
Scott?
Can anybody hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
I had difficulty with my my equipment over here. I don't know what's going on. It's very choppy, so I couldn't hear any of the answers. But to talk about Black Lives Matter, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. It always did. And we brought it from the 60s. And what we're seeing now is the same thing that took place before. Was even, yes, all lives matter. But if we don't make a point of talking about the atrocities that has just took a hold of the whole Black race, Black, brown, if we don't speak about it now, why bother? We have to address it now just as we did in the 60s. And yes, we made great strides, but look where we are now, 2020. We're marching like we did in 1955, 60, in the 60s. And so if we don't make a point of saying Black Lives Matter, what good is it? And the other point is, when Blacks make changes, everybody benefit. And that's the truth. We always have to fight, but our changes, everybody benefit. So, of course, Black Lives Matter, and we have to keep the fight going.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hispanics and other people of color, including Native Americans, have suffered racism and been mistreated throughout history as well. Where do they fit into this movement?
That's a great question. And just to add real quick to what Scottie was saying, right? When we are advocating for Black Lives Matter, right? Like she said, those changes that we're asking will benefit our Latino and our brown community, right? So I see a lot of some of our Latino community members asking that question and asking why are people only protesting when, for the killing of George Floyd and not for when they kill a Latino, right? So I tell them that this we're demanding equal rights for everyone, not just our African American brothers and sisters, but also our Latinos. And now going back to your question, Long Island, right, have a history of racism against Latinos. And that was one of the main reasons why I got motivated to get involved into activism when I was in high school. And we could spend all night talking about the history of Latinos on Long Island and how they've been affected by racism for so long. But just to give you a quick point, since the early 2000s, there had been attacks reported against Latinos here in Suffolk and Nassau County. At that time, it also came not just from regular people, but also from local elected officials, right? Many of you may have remembered Steve Levy, one of the most anti-immigrant racist politicians here in Suffolk County, who was constantly speaking on media so much hatred against immigrants and against Latinos. There has been also, there were also other county legislators that in open meetings called out to go kill day laborers, right, in their communities if they saw them coming into their communities. And that is on record. You can have access to that. And then in our community, we saw also, one of the incidents that really took national attention in 2008, which was the killing of an Ecuadorian immigrant, Marcelo Lucero, who was killed by 7 teenagers while he was walking along the train tracks in Patchogue. That was one of the incidents that took national attention, and that was one hate crime. But there were many hate crimes, and just so you know, the Southern Poverty Law Center issued a report after that incident in 2010, where they found many other incidents like that, many other hate crimes against Latinos, against day laborers, right? And also before the killing of Marcelo Lucero, there were also other incidents reported where in Farmingville, for example, an anti-immigrant, anti-Latino group used to go out and harass day laborers. But not just that, they would go out and set houses on fire where there were Latinos living in, right? So that was happening and continues to happen after today. So it definitely is an issue that affects all of us and our local community. So we experience discrimination not just in the community, not just in the local government, but also in our schools, right? We are experiencing discrimination at all different levels in our community, and we continue to demand a change. There was also another recent uh, incident that was taking place a few years back. So I don't know if you remember hearing the news on Sergeant Green from Suffolk County. This is a police sergeant who was extorting Latinos, right? Because he knew that they were undocumented and they were driving without license, so they would pull them over and will ask them for money and will steal their money to let them go, right? That happened a few years ago, right? And it's all over the news. There are day laborers in Oyster Bay Oyster Bay in 2008 passed a legislation to not allow day laborers to gather on the corner of the street looking for jobs, right? That was passed in 2008, and that fight continues up today. There is a federal lawsuit against the town of Oyster Bay. We also see the village of Freeport, the only day labor site, right, that had been shut down, right, and now those day laborers had been misplaced, right. The same thing happened years ago here in Huntington Station as well. So there are many incidents. Like I say, if we talk about racism on Latinos on Long Island, we can stay here all night, but I think that's enough information. But it does definitely affects all of us, and that's why it's more important that we as Latinos unite in the fight with our African American brothers and sisters, because their fight is also our fight.
Thank you. Just to help our audience be able to hear, if people can mute themselves if they're not speaking and unmute themselves, or at least speak up when you are speaking so that our audience can hear. We're having a few messages that the hearing is a little bit difficult coming in. We have another question.
Did the civil rights movement have an impact on the entire US population or just blacks?
I'll answer this. The civil rights movement, when Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, and so many others fought for the civil rights movement, marched, they did this not just for the African American community, not just for the Latino community. They walked for everyone. So, for example, right after the Civil Rights Act was passed, the president at the time pushed forward new immigration laws that allowed people from Asian countries to immigrate to the United States. So, for example, South Asians and Asians, they started coming here in droves in the late 60s, early 70s, highly skilled. That was because of the civil rights movement. And we, as the South Asian community, we owe a lot to the civil rights movement and what it has given to us, because we wouldn't be able to buy the homes that we own, send our kids to the schools that we send them to, or even run for office. Me, for example, all right, I'm a state senator that represents Levittown here in Nassau County. So civil rights movement has been very beneficial for me and for my community, and my community will always stand with the African American community for what we have received in return for everything that they have to go through. So that being said, you know, that's what I see has come out of this. It has impacted all of the United States, not just one small community.
Anybody else? All right. So the next question is, what is white privilege? What is white privilege? No.
Okay, I'm sorry. Now you can hear me?
Yes.
I'd like to start. Apparently, being the only white person on this panel, you know, I grew up. I'm not an expert on this because I never realized until lately or thought about the fact that apparently I've had white privilege. I've been talking and learning and listening to people of other races, and I was never aware of the fact that others' life is difficult. I never was aware of the fact that a black man or a black woman or Hispanic had to wake up and worry about how they might be treated when they walked into a job or a store. I never ever gave that any thought. I honestly can say that I was never really aware of that until recently. So it's just to think about, you know, what I'm hearing now and realize life is tough enough to have to go through life. You know, white people like myself need to think about this. You know, could you imagine what it's like in this tough world to be treated differently just because of the color of your skin? It's mind-boggling to me. Thank you.
White privilege is, I believe, a direct result of the mistreatment of people of color, people of African descent here in America. So because we've been oppressed, suppressed, repressed, and depressed, they've kind of gotten this platform and where they stand on that. Whereas this group is not good, which means this group is preferred. So we would prefer to hire a white person. We prefer to work or educate white people. We prefer to live, you know, in a white community. We know these white children are not breaking the law because they're not black children. So that's what white privilege is to me. It is a direct result of the mistreatment and discrimination of people of African descent.
So,
What is unconscious bias, and how can we address unconscious bias in our schools and communities?
I mean, I'll take this. It's called education. We need to teach our children about racism, about history, Black history. And I'm not talking about just starting off with slavery. I'm talking about history of Africa, you know, and how everyone ended up here. That's the kind of history that needs to come in and needs to be taught to our children, and about hate symbols and about words that are hurtful. That's where we need to start, you know. And I'm saying this, you know, knowing reality. We cannot change things, you know, in a second like this. We're not miracle workers. But as we teach our young and as they grow up, they're going to teach their children about the history and about hate symbols and hateful words. And the generation that comes up will then proceed in a more you know, natural manner, where they're not offending others, where racism you know, is not as prevalent as it is right now. That being said, I have to run to another Zoom meeting. So thank you so much for inviting me. These are amazing questions, and thank you so much for putting this together. All right, and God bless everyone.
Senator, you can make the statements that we're going to ask at the end. So you want to say anything now before you leave in terms of your last statement?
The last statement is about education. You know, the way I answer that last question, we need to bring up our youth better. We need to have better curriculum in our schools that touch upon these issues, so that when children grow up to be young adults, they know how to react to things, how to you know, talk to people, how to you know, basically go about in society without offending people. You know, that's where we need to start. Education. And Assemblywoman Taylor and I will do everything that we possibly can in the state legislature to protect New York and to make sure that we you know, bring about a better society. And sorry about my daughter crying here, so I have to go as well.
Thank you, Senator.
Okay.
How can white privilege be used to advocate for the rights of people of color?
I would say that white people generally have a lot more access to resources. So they are the ones that own the media. They are the ones that, you know, pretty much own everything at this point in this country. A lot of times, every industry, their hands are there, and if they're not leading, then they're very close to power, proximity of power. So making sure that they're in front of the narrative, making sure that they educate themselves on how they can best use their privilege to spread awareness and to suggest policy reform and support policy reform to just address the disparate impact that we experience here in America. So one example would be, you know, if you will say the media again, because the media usually is leading the narrative of these situations. So making sure that we're doing things just like this panel. And Kevin, thank you so much for being here and understanding the importance of this topic, because we have to partner with the media and we have to partner with, again, people in proximity to power, so that we're able to, again, spread the education, spread awareness and figure out what the actionable steps are to bring about the real progress and the real change. So that's one way that white privilege can be used to advocate for the rights of people of color.
Okay, thank you.
There is a quote that we use when, you know, a sign that we, you know, I have carried at Black Lives Matter protests that says, silence equals violence. Silence equals violence. What does that mean is that now more than ever, we need our white Americans to join and to speak up against racism that has existed in this country for so long. For every social justice issue that we are fighting for, we need allies. We need our white brothers and sisters to join us. Those who believe that there needs to be change, then now is just the time to speak up. Now it's not a time to remain silent. So if you are, you know, just home thinking, you know, oh, I feel so bad for George Floyd, then my question is, what are you doing to change that? What are you doing to make sure that we don't see another video like that anymore? Or we don't see any, or we don't have any case like that anymore in this country. It's time for us to, sorry, there's a background echo. It's time for us to really come together and change what has been happening in this country for so long against people of color.
Yeah, the Assemblyman mentioned, you know, the news media. I mean, you know, that video that circulated, you know, that there were thousands of comments that were put on there. And some of the comments are just, the first thing that needs to happen on the white side is that, in my opinion, is that white people need to first admit that racism exists. I don't even think many people acknowledge it exists. And until everybody acknowledges that it exists, if they don't acknowledge it, they can't even talk about it. You know, I've met, you know, over the past few weeks on Facebook, you cannot change someone's mind on Facebook and try to make them think differently. And the only way that could happen, I would suggest to the senator and assemblywoman that going forward, workshops need to be set up where people that don't think it exists, people who like us, where a dialogue starts to try to make people understand that it exists to begin with and acknowledge it, to be able to even come up with solutions to fix it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, we had a student that was a graduate of the university in this last week, and she got Webster's dictionary to change the definition of racism. So that is exciting. What does systemic racism mean?
Systemic racism is a set of systems that were developed to ensure that here in America, people of African descent never progressed that past a certain point. Anyone who kind of made it past that point, it was in spite of the systemic racism. So you see it in the economy and our economic development and growth, our educational system. You see it in our housing. So these are different areas, major areas where, because of the systems that are built to ensure that, you know, we don't get to always move to better places with resources. We're not making equal pay or pay that we deserve, our prevailing wage, so that we can live comfortably in New York, or we're barred from moving into certain communities, which usually have they usually have an educational component to it, where we decide to live, to have our housing. So if people are barring people of African descent from certain neighborhoods, from certain communities, you are pretty much cutting them off from resources. And that's really what systemic racism is, cutting people off from resources so that they are not able to live a certain quality of life, irregardless of how much hard work and effort they put forth.
I think Scottie was going to say something. We cannot hear you, Scottie.
The sound.
I wasn't going to say something.
I think Miss Coads was going to say something, but I don't know if, can we hear you? Okay.
Okay. Okay, so we go on to the next question.
I just wanted to add, if I may, real quick, that talking about systemic racism, if we talk about systemic racism, we have to go back to the beginning of how this country was built, right? It was built to in a system to benefit certain people that look some way, right? If we, know the history of this country, right? There was a point in time where slavery was legal in this country, right? So that's where we're coming from. So we really need to address, right, where we're coming from. So, these, for example, were laws that were created since the beginning of, that will benefit rich white men, right? For example. So little by little, right, because of social movements that came up. For example, women didn't have the right to vote, right? And these changes had been happening, and slavery was abolished because of movements, right? So let's learn the history, right, of how this country was built, with and that systemic racism started right at the beginning.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Gracias. What is the next question? What are the reasons for someone to be racist?
I'd like to start
What are
with
the reasons for someone to be racist?
I'd like to start with that. I mentioned that I'm the grandfather of a black 7-year-old. I also have a white granddaughter. That's 2. I don't want to get my son mad if I don't mention her. I grew up as the eldest son of a Brooklyn policeman, which is very interesting. I have both gamuts here. I grew up in Queens. My father worked in an area of Brooklyn that wasn't a great area. And I grew up listening to my father bring the job home to our house. And I was trained as a kid to hear how bad certain people were in that neighborhood. And fortunately, when my daughter was 15 or 16 years old, she started, at a young age, she started seeing a black boyfriend, and I came to accept it. I'll be honest with you. I was trained to, and I just had to accept it. And it was probably easier for me than maybe many others that were trained the way that I grew up. And then meeting my daughter's boyfriend, I realized that he was a great guy. And I also went to high school in Oyster Bay, and I played softball with black men, and I wondered what my father was always yelling about. The job changed him. He didn't go into Brooklyn as a cop, and he didn't go there start the job as a racist, but he became a racist, my father, God rest his soul, and I love him to death, because of the job. The job changed him because of what he dealt with every day in that area. I mean, it's not an excuse, but I'm just telling you the facts. So thank you.
Thank you.
I want to say thank you, Kevin, for sharing that experience, because, I couldn't think of a better panel. We have someone who's Caucasian, we have someone who's Hispanic, we had someone who's Indian, and, me, a person of African descent, with roots in both, Europe and here, but slavery existed, and, my family was dropped wherever they were dropped. But it's important to understand how modeling and our conversations and our perceptions can influence our children. especially with something like this, especially with how they're supposed to interact with humans irregardless. And I thank you, Kevin, for sharing your experience with your dad, but I want to take it one step further. Your father probably had all these great stories about how terrible, the people or the community that he policed was, because once again, that feeds into the systemic racism point. You put a bunch of people in a very crowded, terrible environment with concrete, no plants, no room to breathe, no opportunity, no economic opportunities, the educational opportunities are dismal. Yes, people make it out, but they make it out in spite of, and that speaks to the spirit and strength of people of African descent. But that systemic racism pretty much created that environment where your father was watching and policing people who were working to survive against the system that was designed for them to not be here. And that's very important. So I appreciate you sharing that.
Thank
Thank
you. I'm going to check in with Miss Coads. I know she has had some technology difficulties, but I believe she can hear us. And so if she can respond to the next question, or another panelist. The next question is, what is the difference between acceptance and tolerance?
Well, acceptance
Yeah.
acceptance is acknowledging you have a problem, whatever it might be. And you know what? I'm tolerance. I don't know, dealing with the problem. I'm not sure how to answer that.
Yeah, I'll say a little bit more. I know a lot of time people say, well, teach tolerance versus teach acceptance. So do our panelists see that there's a difference between that?
Yeah. Wait, does someone else want to take it?
You go ahead. I'll go after you, Assemblywoman.
Okay. So acceptance, I believe, is a cousin of tolerance. I think it's almost like the appetizer to tolerance. We'll make tolerance the main entree, right? So just like Kevin said, acceptance is accepting something. That's like the first stage in every situation. The stages of grief, the stages here, you have to accept first that something is there, and you see it and you acknowledge it, and it's there, right? Now, tolerance is interesting in the case of race, because once we accept that, let's say, racism is there, or that we are treated different in this country, the tolerance comes from, I think, educating yourself, and then also immersing yourself and deliberately seeking out experiences with people and who are different, who think different, who look different. And in Long Island, it's very difficult to do that because we are very, very segregated here on the island. So I'll just tell you, I used to spend a lot of time in Smithtown, and people would just watch me walk around because they really didn't have a lot of experience of people with African descent. I didn't see anybody else who looked like me, and I was there at least 4 times a week. So it was just interesting to think in the same land in New York, this very diverse, wonderful empire, there are so many pockets where we all stay with our collective groups. We are a bunch of communities existing within a community. So I think that the tolerance part comes from the learning, the interactions with people who are different than we are, and then you and I don't like the word tolerate in relationships, but you grow to embrace it more. It's not like acceptance, but the tolerance is embracing it once you educate and seek out those interactions with people who are different from you. And I'll give you one example. There are a lot of things that are new experiences for me that I didn't really understand. And one of those things was I was given the opportunity to participate in the Gay Pride Parade as an Assemblywoman. And, I don't have a lot of interactions with people who are or identify as being homosexual or part of the LGBTQTX community. So that day I was able to form, budding relationships and ask questions about how things worked, and that solidarity of marching through Manhattan with the governor and so many other people who have had to fight for rights to live a life that they've chosen to live without persecution and all the other things that happen. That really helped me gain a greater understanding. And I don't like to say the word tolerant because I accept and I love everyone, but I became a lot more tolerant of the community's perspective and the community's experiences, you know, because I can speak to them and put a name to a face in some of those interactions.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I wanted to add exactly to what Assemblywoman just mentioned, right? That's exactly what I was going to say. I also don't feel comfortable using the word tolerance or acceptance because you know, I ask myself, who am I to accept someone, right? I'm a same human being as that other person is. We are all created equal. So who gives me the authority to accept someone, right? No. So I'm gonna, you know, introduce a new term for all of you tonight, and that term is celebrate. Let's celebrate each other. Let's celebrate culture. Let's celebrate diversity, right? Because we are all equal, and we all should celebrate who we are. No one should be ashamed of who they are. So why not celebrate each other?
Thank you, Osman. I know
Wait,
we
and
have, yep, go ahead.
I want to say something, Osman, that was beautiful. I reversed the words, tolerate. That's why I wasn't liking it. Tolerate is the appetizer. Acceptance is the entree. So tolerating is like, okay, this is here. Accepting it is allowing it to be a part of your experience, you know, and allowing it to just do its own thing. So tolerating, like we can tolerate hot conditions, but not everybody accepts that. So that's the difference. And I do mix those up a lot because they are very similar terms, but different. So.
Thank you. I know we have Miss Coads who's joining us, even though she is not on the video screen. She can answer this if she'd like to, or another panelist. How can we get additional people of color as elected officials? Ms. Coads, can you hear us? How can we get more people of color as elected officials?
Okay, so any of you?
I'd like to, I'll jump in.
Okay.
Touchy subject, but what I've learned over the past 4 years going to town board meetings and watching candidates come forward on both sides. Obviously candidates have to want to run, but what I've noticed is that the parties, whatever party it is, the party seems to be the one that decides who they want to put forward. And I think there needs to be a communication effort, not so much to candidates, but to the parties to search, not just for the powerful or the white, or, you know, as an example, a few years ago, I came to know a woman from South America, from Peru. She's lived here for 30 years. And she can't even explain. She couldn't, when she met me, she didn't know the structure of town government on Long Island. I took her to a town board meeting, and she told me that her people, they don't understand the structure of town government. They don't even know there's a supervisor or a council people or whatever. And at that time, I actually spoke to one of the party leaders, and I said to them that you need to educate. In this case, it was the Latino community. If anything, it'll not only help them, but it'll help you to get them to vote for you. Yeah, we need to look into that, I was told. I followed up on it months later, went in one ear and out the other. I'm not going to mention any names like I usually do. But yeah, I think that the parties have to have acceptance that there might be a problem in that area, right? So I don't even know if that answered the question.
Okay, okay.
I would I would
Assemblywoman?
say 100%. Yep, 100%. You answered the question, Kevin. Just speaking about my experience, I always shied away from government and politics because I never felt like it was really designed for us. I thought it was very inefficient, very exclusive. So these were things I was not interested in. And the call to duty really came when my sister, who was involved with a party or someone who was heavily involved with the party, said, you know what, we don't really like where our community is going. You get paid to fix things for a living. Why don't you go fix our community? Would you want to run for Assemblywoman? And I was like, don't even know what that is. Never even heard of it. And I took AP government. I don't remember anything about the New York State Assembly. But I said, you know what? I was feeling a void in my life that I wasn't giving back enough to my community, and I was making a lot of rich white people richer. So I said, let me turn my talents to the community that educated me, the community that loved me. And I ran for office, but I had no understanding of the process. So Kevin, you're 100% correct. They say that applied knowledge is power. So what you'll find a lot of times, again, the people who have proximity to power, they want to control that. So the way you control that is by keeping everyone else in the dark or making it seem like whatever you're doing is nothing we'd be interested in or that would benefit us. So every once in a while during races, during elections, we get a visit from an elected official, and maybe we'll see them again, maybe we won't. But the reality is, the system was designed for a certain type of person with a certain type of wealth, because it is very expensive to run for office and stay in your seat, very expensive personally and professionally. So it was designed for a certain type of people. That's why you would even see for the assembly, we just got the first pay increase in 20 years. 20 years, we went from $79,500, I believe, to now $110,000. So you tell me who could afford to pretty much live two places for 6 months out of the year on $79,800. Yes, you can have outside income. Yes, you can have another profession. But this job, when done correctly, especially for underserved areas, you are working from awake to asleep and awake again. That's when you're working all the time because there's so much need. So the fact that, again, we're not able to apply the knowledge because we don't know, very, very important piece. So what I did as soon as I came into office was develop a pipeline project so that our community can start identifying leaders age 12 through infinity that we start developing. Now that I have the experience and I've worked with some experts in politics and organizational development, we created this great program. As soon as we get the green light to be in the same room again together, we're going to have our first class, and we're just going to start developing our own leaders, because there's always going to be a seat that's about to be open. A special election can happen today at any point. People move, people die. And then also there are appointment positions. And I always tell the community, if you stay ready, you don't have to get ready. We know it's coming. So let's make sure that we have succession planning. We have people ready to place in these positions, because we can't necessarily blame a party if we're not developing our own leaders. Because they do ask. In my experience, they ask if we know of anyone, and the answer is usually no, because we're not looking or developing them. So
Okay, very good. Okay.
I just want to real quick want to say that I just got a text from a friend of mine that happens to be white, and I just want to add that there's a lot of white people, Jewish people in areas that don't understand the structure of town government. It's not just people of color. I think that there needs to be a lot more communication to everybody about getting involved in town government after explaining that there is a town government.
I just want to point out to the same, the exact same point, that let's think about why our government was created like that, right? Let's think about why there are so many different levels of governments in our local community that we all don't understand how they work, right? It was for the same purpose of keeping people oppressed and not allowing them to exercise the right to vote, to confuse people, to divide people. That was their main purpose of dividing government in so many different branches. So it's important that we also talk about that as well.
Okay, so the next question is, how do we make law enforcement equitable and accountable?
Mhm.
I would say first, same thing I said with the children, understanding where everyone is. Like, so I was doing some research on, when a law enforcement professional can, pretty much kill someone and it's okay. And they were saying that the law enforcement every police department has their own set of guidelines. So they're governed by state law pertaining to law enforcement practices, and then they're governed by their own department. So I would say just really getting a great understanding of where departments are, where their training is, and understanding that transparency and accountability are two words that can no longer be optional. I am very transparent with the community that I was elected to represent because I understand that I am paid with their tax dollars and that I have a responsibility to them. So I tell them, these are your offices. If you need to come here, you are paying for this rent. You are paying for these lights to be on. You're paying for this paper. I want people to feel the government because they are the ones that selected me to represent them. And this is a huge responsibility. Same thing with any civil servant, and especially police. If you are here to protect and serve, there needs to be a collaboration with the community. There needs to be a lot of communication, and more than that, transparency and accountability. So getting those policies in these police departments tightened up, having them reviewed maybe by different organizations who specialize in equitable treatment, just seeing where we can tighten up policies. And once the policies are tightened, that feeds into the training. And the training cannot be a once a month training. It can't be, every 6 months, come on in and learn how to love your neighbor training. This has to be something that is literally embodied, entrenched, just like a lot of racism is entrenched in a lot of our law enforcement departments. We want to make sure that this is something that is second nature and that only comes from a concrete message and repetitive hits of a concrete message. So that's what I would say would help with law enforcement to be more equitable. Mm-hmm. Oh, and hold on, representation. There need to be representative police forces. If we are in a community with yellow people, brown people, purple people, in a perfect world, our law enforcement departments will reflect that. It is, I believe it's not the only step, but it is definitely one of those steps to ensure that people are coming from communities and understand those nuances that someone from another community may not understand, and may respond to differently. So we want to make sure that we have representative police forces, and we're encouraging our children to look into law enforcement and all of the professional opportunities there.
I want to add, just definitely.
Osman, I'm just going to have you go slow so our translators have time to
okay.
Do that.
Sorry about that. Okay, so I just want to echo what Assemblywoman Darling was saying. Definitely, and I thank our elected officials for taking the initiative on working on the bills that they're working on. But definitely, I think we need transparency and accountability from our local police departments, right? I had been advocating here on Long Island for over 12 years. I started when I was in high school, right? And we have had many meetings with our local police department commissioners, right? Where we bring to them all our concerns. We bring to them cases of, people that we hear in the community, of stories of people that have suffered, incidents of all levels. And we ask for more trainings. We ask for interpretation services for our community. Yes, there has been some changes, but in a lot of cases, they have told us we have no money. We have no money to do more trainings, and we cannot do more trainings. So I think now it's time for that to change. I think that now that this whole movement is happening, we are going to continue protesting on the streets if we don't see concrete change, right? Because we're tired of hearing from commissioners, the police commissioners, hearing from elected officials saying we'll do this and that. And at the end of the day, the next day, they forget what they say the prior day. So we are going to keep everyone accountable, right, for their promises. And just to talk also another point that I want to mention about transparency, accountability with our local, with our police, but also let's think about, how much resources are we putting right in the police department, but also how much resources are we putting in social workers, in mental health services in our communities, and non-for-profit organizations in our communities. Let's talk about that, right? And just to give you a quick example, right? A report from the Center for Popular Democracy Action indicates that nationwide, $100 billion is spent in policing each year, comprising of 20% to 45% of funds. And in Chicago, for example, police and corrections departments receive 40.5% of funds in 2019, while mental health services receive only 0.9%, and youth and jobs programs receive only 2.4% of the general funds, right? So how could that be possible, right? That we are overfunding the police, right? But we're not providing adequate funding for schools, to hire more mental health counselors. We're not providing more resources for community agencies to provide mental health services, right? So let's think about that.
Very good.
Osman, you're leading right into our next question and answered it in essence. The New York Times this weekend talked about, well, I'll read it. In New York City, over the past several years, the police budget has increased by $1 billion to now over $6 billion, and that's just in a few years. Yet, I don't know if we're any safer and violence continues. So wouldn't that extra $1 billion of taxpayer money be better invested in housing or jobs, or education, or fighting structural inequality? Healthcare.
Okay, I firmly feel, and I was just discussing this, that when it comes to funding anything, right, revenue streams are very, very, very important. And I think that a lot of times we'll look at something and say, we need more money. Funding is not adequate. I mean, I hear that all the time. So I've started getting organizations and institutions that I represent into the habit of saying, these are our 4 plans to increase or modify our revenue streams, but we could use X amount of dollars to do whatever. And I have found ways for some of these organizations and institutions to get additional funding, but to also partner with other organizations and institutions to provide the needs that they have. And I'll give an example. I've taken a tour of the Nassau County Police, some of their departments. And one thing that I love that they did was, because of holes in funding, which all this money, and they still have holes. I mean, it's expensive to do anything in New York, right? They started kind of bartering. Like if like say Suffolk County Police has this type of training camp, but Nassau doesn't have it, they'll let Nassau use it. So they're kind of like utilizing each other's resources. So for the example that Osman just gave, which excellent points, Osman, regarding funding and where we put our money, because that's usually, we're going to put our money in the things that we hold most important to us, right? So all this money is in law enforcement in this country. If people are responding, they don't have the money for adequate training that's necessary to properly protect and serve, then someone needs to really be responsible for creating these plans where they can partner with other institutions. Like, for example, I live near Hofstra. I represent Hofstra. Adelphi is also in my area. These are research colleges. These are colleges that do have certain resources. And I think that, saying that we don't have the money for training is kind of a cop-out. Like, everything is not just like you ask, you get. We have to be creative, because guess what? Every area in the United States needs more money for funding. That's just what it is. And we don't want to be in a situation where, our police forces don't have the resources they need to be successful. And unfortunately, you don't find that out until, guess what? You don't have the resources. I mean, look at us in the middle of this pandemic. We've had to call the military to come in. We've had to call, other agencies to come in and support our local police. So we definitely don't want to be in that type of situation. But at the same time, I believe that for this much money, we could be a lot more creative with our partnerships, law enforcement and hospitals, law enforcement and higher education institution, law enforcement and K through 12 schools. These are ways that we can kill 3 or 4 birds with one stone, having, police officers get their training in schools, maybe with certain students that they've identified as people who'd be interested in law enforcement. There's so many ways that we could do this that could potentially save us a lot of money, so we can appropriate some of these funds to other areas where there really is dire need.
Exactly. I just want to say that communication and training, no matter how much money you throw at the training, it comes down to, I was just talking about this yesterday to somebody. I asked somebody, wasn't there a training facility just built, a new training facility in Nassau County? And I was told that it's not finished yet. And you just mentioned it. But I said, that's great. The building could look great on the outside, but what's going on the inside? Typically the way that it's been, the training is going to be the way that the training has always been, unless the people who run the training center consider hearing ideas and recommendations from the public to try to incorporate. I mean, I could come up with different ideas that they probably don't train for. The training needs to be updated. The training needs to change. The people who run the training, they need to involve the communities. They need to do role playing when you arrest a white man, when you arrest a black, role playing, real situations. Teach these young, I have 3 or 4 police officers in my family right now. Okay, I was told by my nephew that when he got on the NYPD 6 or 7 years ago, he says, Uncle Kevin, he says, I went to a class for like 6 hours about guns and they handed me a gun. He couldn't believe it. The training programs need to be updated with community involvement. Thank you.
For the purpose of time, because we're getting to the end, we're going to go not to the next question, just for the translators. We're going to go to the following one, and it's a very one. I think it's an interesting one. If we protest, will people change the racist minds? If we protest, will people change the racist minds?
I feel like protests work, Martin Luther King said it best. He said that unified and organized pressure is what brings about measurable results, right? Mm-hmm. So protests are involving a lot of unification, a lot of organization that we have not seen. This is really the birth of the second civil rights movement. And it's here because, like, I've stated before, there was a stop. After the 60s, 70s, I think, a lot of people became comfortable. The economy was doing better, for a time. And people, especially people of African descent, we were able to gain opportunities from the first civil rights movement, or the major civil rights movement of the 60s, because there have been other ones, right? So from the civil rights movement of the 60s, where my grandmother may have been fighting, my mother was able to get into law school with a fellowship. She was able to do a bunch of things that, her mother and her grandmother and her great grandmother were not able to do. So it gave us, I think, some of us that false sense of comfort. But as we see today, that little break in making sure that we are protecting our civil rights, you know, has led us here, where in 2020 we're having so many similar conversations and worse than the conversations that we were having in the 60s. So I believe that the protests are one of the first steps to, again, bringing people together so that they can begin to tolerate and accept differences, and they can begin to be educated. Everybody's watching this and paying attention. And one thing that we do have that they did not have in the 60s is social media. We're able to share news and experiences pretty much at the speed of light in real time. If you do a live, you can literally share this. So someone from, you know, some remote corner of the world who may not have ever known what was going on in America until, you know, months and months later, they now know what's going on. And we're working on making sure that our asks are unified. Like, what do we want? What do we want from these protests? So I think that the focus, and we know we can organize, we know how to protest now safely. What are our asks? What do we want? What are we setting out to accomplish? And that message needs to be unified and organized and broken down into actionable steps. You know, it's almost like if someone comes to you and says, I'm not happy with my job. It's kind of like, okay, so what do you want? I want a new job. Okay, so what's the first step in that? And that's really where it goes. It's really that simple. You know, we were doing this. We have the momentum. We have the attention. What are we expecting to happen here in America, which will definitely resonate in the rest of the world? What are we expecting? What are our 4 asks? And I think that's really where our attention needs to be with our protests and our groups that are organizing.
Yeah,
we have the last question. We have the last question. Maybe you can answer both at the same time, Osman. And we got it from one of the students, I believe. Why are people at the protest destroying things such as shops, and why are people stealing from these stores?
So I definitely, don't agree with violence, right? We believe in peaceful protest and the greater effect that peaceful protests will create, right? So what I can say, and as a person that has been in many protests here on Long Island and other states, what I want to say is that there are a few people that infiltrate those marches, and their mission or their purpose is to do exactly that, is to disrupt and destroy things, right? But what I can testify is that the majority of people in protest and the majority of protests happening across the country and across the world, because this really went all over the world, that where we have marches, massive marches going on. For the most part, that those are peaceful protesters. But again, there are few people that infiltrate marches with a different mentality and with a different purpose to take the focus out of the peaceful protesters and take the message, right, and do other things that shouldn't have happened, in my opinion.
Other comments from any of you?
Yeah, I just want to quickly say that I have video live streamed probably a good 8, maybe 10 protests on Long Island, only on Long Island. And I have not seen one personally seen. I have not seen any, looting or violence. I haven't seen it at all. Now, New York City Manhattan's a different story. I have a nephew in the city. It's night and day compared to Long Island. And who's doing the looting? Who's doing that? Are people taking advantage of the protests and using that as an opportunity? I mean, listen, the purpose of a protest, and the Assemblywoman said it earlier, people that are in power, the protesters are trying to get the attention and demanding change. And some people just take it too far, maybe, but Long Island has been extremely peaceful. And I want to say also that most of the protesters on Long Island, 90% are wearing masks. you know. And now, as of the last couple of days, even the Nassau County police officers are wearing masks, which is a change, which I'm happy to see.
Good. So we finished with the questions, and now Sarah is going to introduce the following segment.
We're going to have closing statements by our panelists, and we'd like you to think of a few questions that our participants have asked, and some of those include, how can we bridge the gap in our country among those who do not want policy to change and those of us who believe that reform and change must occur? So that's one thing to think about. Another thing to think about is, where do we go from here? How can we individually eradicate racism? What else can we do to make a difference in addition to voting and participating in the 2020 census? And how can we as students, parents, teachers, or community members play a role in change in our community? So if your closing statements can address some of those points for our viewers, we would appreciate that. Thank you.
Well, I'll go first since I'm on the top of the screen, and we'll go there. First off, I want to sincerely thank everyone for inviting me. It's been an unbelievable experience. I've never done anything like this before, and especially thanks to Sean and his people for spending the time to get me on this today. A lot of help, but you know, I'm not an expert on this topic. I filmed a protest yesterday in Jericho, and I watched a white woman grab the bullhorn and admit that she's somebody who maybe was closed-minded, and she said she decided to come to the protest, and she admitted that she needs to learn. Mm-hmm. She needs to learn about this topic, and I suspect there's a lot of people. Maybe there's young children watching this from the charter school or everyone, that people need to open their minds to learn about this. And I'm no expert on this. You know, I've learned a lot over the past few weeks. I said earlier, I had no idea the magnitude of this problem until I dropped off an Uber passenger in Merrick. And across the street, you know, God works in strange ways. Across the street, there was a crowd of people screaming. And I looked over and I thought they were the protesters. And I stood there and I finally determined that it wasn't the protesters that was screaming. It was the residents, or let me take that back. I don't know if they were the residents, if they were people, they were civilians that were screaming at the police to not allow the protesters that were peaceful to walk down the block. And when that happened that day, it was just an awakening. And I've been just listening, learning, and I just encourage everybody to open their minds and listen. There's a problem. Just read the comments on social media. People need to open their minds. And I'm no expert, but what I was saying, the lady came to the protest yesterday and said that she's there to listen and to learn. And that's what everyone needs to do. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thank you. Next one. All right. Assemblywoman.
Osman or Assemblywoman, who would like to?
Assemblywoman, you can go first.
I thought we were going down the line. Okay. I would say definitely I support what Kevin just said, the listening and the learning. You know, a lot of times when we are working on change, we want to rush in and we want to just, you know, come in with our solutions. And that is like, you don't even start the solution process until after you listen, you really process make sure questions are answered. And then once the space is safe and clear, that's when you really are able to create the solutions together. And that's what it really is about. Change is scary, but I know the wrong way to bring about change, which is quickly in a way that doesn't include everyone or take all these factors into consideration. Like for me, with the police reform, I'm not a police officer, right? So I've never been a police officer. I've never gone through training. So for me to feel like, and this is my opinion, I can run in and tell police departments how they should run their department without first listening and understanding, that's to me, that's incorrect. I think it's very, it's not a mature or effective way to handle change. So I would say the listening, the learning, and ways that we can really make a difference. I would say run for office, start developing leaders in your community, start being a leader in your community. You know, a leader is someone who will invite you to follow them through a process. And we have leaders all throughout our community. So I think that one way that we can help is breaking down the divisive sub-communities within our community. You know, how many times in Nassau County, I'll give you an example. I've been to the Salvadorian Day Parade like twice or three times in a professional capacity. And I literally took a moment to count the people of African descent that I saw there. And there was one woman. And I think there might have been 15,000 people at that exact moment. How in the center of the largest village in the country, Hempstead, which is primarily Hispanic and African American, you know, and West Indian, how are we able to just have these events, like have these sub-communities? This divisiveness is exactly why I believe so many systems have been able to continue to thrive. They cannot have us together. So if they cannot have us together, that means that we need to come together. There needs to be a lot more incorporation of events. I joked about a taco and Modelo party, or a Hennessy and chicken wing party. We do it all together. Like the things that mean stuff to each of our cultures at one time. Food, music, those are things that we all connect with, you know. So there need to be more ways to celebrate, as Osman said, and just encourage people to step out of their boxes, because all of these individual boxes are not giving us the results that a lot of us or a lot of people came to this country for, which is opportunity. If I have information and resources and I'm not sharing it with the sub community next to me, they don't have that opportunity, and vice versa. So I think the collective coming together to celebrate and learn and develop leaders in our community is very important. I think that's really a great place to start. And vote. I don't care if it's like Lay's asking you which flavored chip you think we should eat or name it. Vote for everything. Just always vote. I had horrible voting history because, again, I told you my aversion to government and politics. And now with my knowledge, local government is everything, you know. And voting does actually bring about change. So we need to make sure that we continue to apply that organized and unified pressure so we can get the results we want. And voting is one of those very specific ways that people have literally died to be able to do in this country. I thank you guys for having me on this panel. It was brilliant. I always look forward to partnering with you, Gil, and Dr. Brewster, Sarah, and Osman, always incredible. And Kevin, I'm really excited to be able to learn your perspective and hear more about your work and what you do. But workshops like these, panels like these, they need to happen consistently. This was what needs to happen. So thank you guys for giving us that opportunity.
Thank you.
Okay, it's my turn. I definitely want to echo what Kevin and Assemblywoman Darlene mentioned about listening and also, learn from each other. We need to start the dialogue. We need to start this conversation, and that's exactly what this whole movement has bring us to, right? We wouldn't be having this forum today if it wasn't for what's happening, right? So for our community, all of our communities, right? Because I hear from my Latino community also, right, asking questions about why are you protesting for African Americans, right? We need to have this conversation about things that are happening in our community and how these things are affecting all of us. all of us, not just African Americans, Latinos, poor people, right? It's affecting everyone. So we need to have that conversation. We need to talk to each other, right? Have this dialogue with each other. We may not agree on everything, but we can have a dialogue, a respectful dialogue. That's what's missing in most cases. And then one message I want to also make clear is that, you know, we're not, because a lot of people are saying, oh, you are anti-police, you are anti-police. No, we're not anti-police. We know that there are good police officers, right? We know there are good police officers working in our community. We're not anti-police, right? What we're asking is for the system to be changed. What we're asking is for there to be more transparency and accountability, right? For those officers that are not doing what they're supposed to, right, and are abusing their power against our communities of color, for them to be held accountable. That's what we're asking for. So we are not against the police, and I want to make that clear to our community. And another message that I want to say is that we need to come together as a community. There has been a divisive among the Latino and African American community for so long, right? And it's time for us to come together. And I can testify, right, that as an advocate for immigrant rights for so many years, our African Americans and white Caucasian community, you know, many of them are with us, right, in marches, are with us in meetings with politicians, advocating for us as well. So they support us. We need to support them as well. And lastly, what the point that I want to mention is that um, earlier today we talked about systemic racism, right? And one question that you should be asking is why my community is getting less resources than my neighbor community, right? Why is it that my community is underfunded while the school, my neighborhood, the school at my, you know, the next town next door have computers in their classroom for each student or tablets for each student? Why is that? Let's talk about that, right? So you now have an opportunity to be an activist, and that is one, to speak up, about anything that you see that's wrong and that's going on in your community. Do not remain silent. Speak up. But and the second thing, Assemblywoman already mentioned, which is voting. Encourage everyone that's eligible to vote, if they haven't registered to vote, to go out and register to vote and participate in election, not just for presidential election. That is an important election, yes, but also our local election, right? There are elected officials representing us at the state level, at the town level, at the city or the village level, and at the school level. We need to vote for every single election that there is, and really know who is running for office and what their platform is, and hold them accountable for whatever promise they made while they were campaigning for office. And the third and last thing is, now we are in the moment of the census. Now we are in the moment of the census. And I really, really ask our community, if we want to see more funding coming to our community, you need to participate in the census. There is information in many different languages. You too have received in the mail a form to be completed, where you're going to list all the individuals that live in your household, right? In the house, in the entire property. If you're renting an apartment, a room, the, they don't care about if that room is illegal or not, right? They just need every single person in that household, in that house, in that property to be counted. If you recently had a baby, right, that's 1 month old or 1 day old, right, that baby needs to be counted as well. That is the only way that we're going to get more resources and more money coming to our communities that are severe underfunded. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you so much, Circulo, for this forum and for giving me the opportunity to participate. And thank you to my colleagues as well.
I want to thank all our panelists. We had Senator Kevin Thomas, who had to leave earlier, and I know Ms. Scottie Coads is listening in. She's had some technical difficulties, and we want to thank her for being there and cheering us on in spirit with this, as well as our Assemblywoman Taylor Darling, Osman Canales, and Kevin McKenna. Thank you all for this. This is a beginning, and we appreciate your efforts to be part of this dialogue today.
So thank you in the name of the Board of Trustees of Evergreen Charter School and the whole family of Evergreen. And in the same way, thank you, gracias, from the Circulo Board of Directors and Circulo's family. We know that we had some technical difficulties. It's the first time that we're doing it. We try to include the Spanish-speaking community by having this kind of new system with the Zoom. If it was not perfect, I'm sorry, but we try our best to include everybody. So gracias, buenas noches, thank you, good evening, and we will repeat that. And thank you for everybody who supported us. Thank you, gracias. Good night.
Have a good night, guys.
Buenas
Thank you so
noches.
much.
Dios te
Buenas
bendiga.
noches.
Dios te bendiga.
Gracias.
Thank you.
Thank you, gracias.
And thank you all.